Senator, when you were in Congress, in the House and the Senate, you were known for being somebody to get the economy moving and supporting innovation. So how has this consumer welfare standard really been a boom for our economy over the past decades, particularly since the growth in tech?
Well, let me go further back to the progressive era. The progressive era was an era dominated by thinking that the modernization that was happening in America, that involved consolidation of industries like the steel industry, the sugar refining industry, the oil industry. The sort of logic of the progressive era was that this was harmful and it had to be hurting consumers, and therefore something should be done about it.
By the government to more regulation.
Now, we know now, having gone back and looked at the 10 years before the Sherman Act was adopted and the 10 years after it was adopted, and found that prices fell further, faster, before antitrust legislation than after. So I think the first thing to note in this debate is there never was any empirical evidence, especially after the fact when we could look at what happened. There was never any evidence of consumer benefit from antitrust action to begin with. In fact, the evidence is overwhelming that the adoption of the Sherman Act and the subsequent regulation that occurred produced a situation where prices either started to rise or started to fall at a slower rate than they were falling beforehand. So I want to start with that point. The problem with antitrust laws that don't focus on consumer interest is that they become a license to do whatever you want to do. So when you look at the empirical evidence, there's no evidence that antitrust laws benefited consumers to begin with. Now, the contribution of Judge Bork and a lot of other people, and it was a broad-based intellectual exercise of trying to take the Sherman Act back to what its objective was and should have been, to protect the consumer, not to protect the producer.